talk about what SSV is doing in in certain program areas. We will hear from on air quality and mobility and some STEM stuff with other sessions. I wanted to give a little bit of time to the our programs. In terms of this orange sky situation, I think that comes as a kind of a memory that is hopefully we won't see that again, but I did want to kind of bring that up because yesterday, actually, just locally here, I experienced well, besides the heat and the Spare the Air Day, a power outage and then a nearby wildfire. So it was some kind of quadruple witching that occurred, and we did get power back at 9 o'clock or so. But obviously a lot of stuff is getting real as far as a changing climate and the impact on us. The warming stripes kind of show things pretty drastically as well. And I mean, there's fairly a lot of kind of bad news. And it is a constant struggle to kind of, try to move towards solutions and good things. And as Eric Holthaus had mentioned, I mean, there is a need to, definitely recognize reality, but then also kind of build towards a better world. And that mix of fire and green shoots is something that our forests have actually been taken care of. So in terms of the water program, we do have a document. It's called the Water Manifesto, and it really splits things up into 3 areas that we think are important and where we kind of focus our limited resources, and that is the valuing water, make water, and leave water. The value part is about efficiency and conservation, and we do get involved in a lot of things around those areas and encouraging certainly the utility programs for good water use stewardship, because the recognition is it can't be said enough that the Bay Area imports water. It just imports it from the Sierra, but it definitely imports it, from 125-mile pipelines through, and in quantity, we import as much as goes down to the LA basin. We are water importers, and we have to, it is a very precious resource that is definitely under strain. The traditional snowpack is a shadow of its former self. So it's very important in terms of, say, the valuing of water and taking those steps to do that. There is, in the scheme of things, it is important to note, it's a little bit of a counter narrative, but it's important to note that the urban and industrial use is really about 20%, and 80% is agriculture. And so in the water program, that is something we are looking to get involved in as well. That gets us more actually into kind of the Central Valley on some of the issues they're dealing with there, because they have to be obviously smart in water use as well. And it is there's a lot of complicated issues in terms of supply, in terms of water rights, And there's a lot of, though, potential for the sharing of water as well. But one of the classic things with a changing climate is its impact on underserved communities. And we actually, locally, that was a problem, for instance, in East Palo Alto, because as East Palo Alto was formed as an entity after the initial water rights have been doled out, and they had a lot of growth issues and building prohibitions based on their water situation. And luckily, the city of Palo Alto was a leader, and other local government in San Mateo and County were able to work things out that alleviated this problem to some extent. But I mean, just as a local example, that is a real tough one. There's obviously a lot of issues with the Central Valley and the water allocation, where it might be great for almonds and pomegranates, but not so great for a number of poor communities in the Central Valley. So that's something that we are involved in as well. Kirsten Struve was talking about the water purification at Valley Water. We have been big supporters of water reuse, whether and kind of extended essentially satellite systems for the water management, and so both in terms of private and public entities, there's a real need for advanced water filtration, and that really is that kind of make water aspect. So from an aggregate, that is really going to be an important tool as far as water filtration. Now, there's a number of different ways to do that, ranging even to, you hear about desal. Our WaterPalooza event, which is again coming up in probably in September, had a session last year on brackish desal, which has actually been going on in the lower part of the bay, in southeastern part of the bay, in Newark, where they've been doing brackish desal is a lot less concentrated salts than ocean, and so they've been able actually to run a brackish desal plant very quietly for like the last 19 years, I think. That's the Alameda County Water District. So there's a number of different solutions as far as making water. And lastly, I wanted to get into the water supply issue as far as leaving water, because water, is taken out of rivers by water rights holders, and that this is the California system, but there is a problem, because if you take too much out, you really damage the river ecosystems, and ultimately, it's a huge problem in terms of, well, for instance, in terms of fish populations, but also the health of the rivers and the surrounding areas as well. So there is a lot of work in that particular realm as well, that the State Water Board has been involved in, and all the various entities, stakeholders like irrigation districts, and and actually all the water entities in the Bay Area are. There's some recognition of this, but then of course it's tough, because then it gets down to numbers. We did host an event, a wet talk, about water supply and the water demand calculations and the assumptions behind that. It was a very eye-opening, kind of session. A lot of the demand, that are based on, in terms of storage, were quite off. Generally, there's a trend for less people to use, more people in terms of population using less water overall. And I think that's something we, obviously that gets into the value water where we need to do that as well. And therefore we can start looking at leaving or at least allowable levels of water in rivers. Speaking of wet talks, I do have some breaking news here in that we will have a new wet talk, which our season sponsor is Cargill. And Dr. Daniel Swain, who of course is shockingly young, but he holds multiple positions. He's a research professor at UCLA. You'll learn about him a lot, but he has he's a climatologist who is very much an expert in meteorology and extreme weather, floods, wildfires, winds. He has a website, it's a blog site, Water West, and I think the Twitter, that name. It's very good information about long-term weather projections, specifically on the Pacific Coast. And I think this is an amazing get for the Wet Talk series. He's nationally known, actually internationally known, and very much an expert, consulted with by publications as well. So he's in the news quite a bit. I want to switch gears here, though we'll keep the water buckets, about regenerative communities. And this is a project, it's been a bit underground. It's still kind of underground, but I did want to just mention it's a sustainable community development framework. As you see there, there's no great way to make that an acronym. But it includes, the reason there's buckets here is that we have a number of buckets that we want to look at land development, some of these large developments that are going on around the Bay Area that involve retail, office, housing. We want to look at them through a sustainable lens with from a number of perspectives, and they are here in some of the bullet points. I'll say the last one is special features, is basically some things that are sweeteners that developers might add to a certain area. I know there was an office development that added an indoor ice rink or something, so those are kind of the special features or other kind of community, interesting community options. But for the most part, we wanted to look at a number of these things and comment on these. We see a need for this because just in terms of commenting and trying to help planning commissions and city councils kind of deal with these, try to get some perspective on the particular developments and some of the aspects of them, especially from a sustainable lens, because these are 100-year projects and they need to be done. So from a program standpoint, we've done some work with different teams from the San Jose State Business School's Sabona program in terms of web development, and then also some of the initial research on different projects as well. And I didn't want to do that, but I did want to give a shout out to Neda Shaustari, who has kind of joined us. She has a great background as an urban planner and lawyer, and has been a real big help to me now and hopefully in the future. Our last checkpoint here was a Sustain-a-Palooza session. I'd say it's maybe a little, we're not getting a full thing into it, but this is just know that this is something we will be talking about more in the future, and we may devote a dev talk or some other kind of thing as far as our outreach. Also want to mention that we are part of the Smart Surfaces Coalition network. That's a DC-based organization that is really looking at achieving urban cooling, and they are very smart in terms of public financing for a number of things to keep cities cool, and they did a study on Stockton, California. They previously had concentrated on Baltimore and Philadelphia on the East Coast. So this was a good West Coast model for them to use, and we look forward to working them in the future. We had both a wet talk recently and a brown bag just on the financing part with them this year. Lastly, SSV policy. There's a number of bills that we've been following and supporting, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow. A little later today, though, we will be talking about SB 917, or at least ADINA 11 will be as well. And in terms of water reuse, we're trying to make it, say, normal, instead of it being a completely new thing for any regulatory authority. This should be a regular situation. There's a couple other things. AMI stands for Advanced Metering Infrastructure. You can't manage what you can't measure. And so that is something that involves the Public Utility Commission as well. And we also, this long term, we wanted to also get into something called the rights of nature, which is a legal doctrine that goes back into the 70s in the Supreme Court, in terms of, say, fish populations and rivers. If corporations are people, rivers can be people too. This is something that Thurgood Marshall actually took up in 1972 on the Supreme Court. And it seems that he was very much ahead of his time, in that when we start looking at leaving water in rivers and making sure that there's at least a baseline for health in terms of the Tuolumne River or some of the other rivers that we draw water from, that we keep them healthy as a number one thing. And just another quick mention. Obviously, the world has a lot of has some major war going on, and we do have Bruce Nagel, I'd like to thank for a lot of his work in terms of the electric building code, the REACH codes that over 60 cities in California have adopted. And